So your next favorite website on the internet is this one, Quarkus.io. We have a lot of very nice guides, and we have a blog, we have the community support, we have everything. But if you want to start the Quarkus experience, you should go here on the top right corner and click on Start Coding. And when you do that, here's the Quarkus generator. So the only boring part about this demo is that I have to type this group ID, which is going to be com Red Hat developers, and I'm also the artifact ID, which is going to be Nairobi JVM, because that's you. And we have a lot of extensions or dependencies that you can add to your Quarkus project. But right now, we're just going to hit generate your application, and it's going to download a zip file. On my machine, it is already downloaded, so that's when the experience starts. So the easiest way for you to start a Quarkus project is through the generator. So I can just go there and unzip the file, already have a Quarkus project. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to open my favorite IDE these days, which is Visual Studio Code with a Java extension plugin provided by Red Hat, by the way. And I think it didn't open properly. So let's do it again. What is happening here? So let's quit and do it again. Yeah, now it opened correctly. So here's my Visual Studio Code. Let me increase the font size too so you can see it properly. So this is Visual Studio Code, and now we're going to, and you can see that with the generator project, we have a file here, example resource. We already generate, since I added the JAX-RS extension, already have a JAX-RS endpoint available for you. So let's start my favorite Quarkus feature, which is development mode. So the magic happens when I type this magic word mvn Quarkus :dev. So Quarkus is going to start in development mode, and usually my machine is super fast, but just be aware that because we're having this online meeting and I'm running OBS for this fancy effect in my camera here, I have a green screen. So usually it takes longer, but even though Quarkus already started in just 1.3 seconds, but usually when I'm trying to do live development mode, Quarkus restarts in about 100 milliseconds, 150 milliseconds. Let's see if the demagogues are on my side today. So I'm running development mode. You can see here in my browser. Let's try to issue a request, localhost 8080. Yes, my new cloud native application is ready. And let's go to my hello world endpoints. Yes, hello. It's working. So now I'm going to go back to my IDE and say, well, with Quarkus, I'm saying hello, but just because I'm Brazilian, I could say, well, return hola and save, which is hello in Portuguese. Say hola, save the file, go back to my browser, hit a refresh, and the result is already here. And how long did Quarkus take to reload? Quarkus took, in this particular case, 200 milliseconds. And the more you use Quarkus, the better. So you don't have to wait for anything anymore. You don't have to wait for your Maven build to stop your application server, copy the artifacts, restart, wait for application server to warm up. Everything is automatically there. So with Quarkus, development is so amazing that you just have to just keep coding and you just hit refresh. Everything is automatically there. And just by the way, last week I had to create a new microservice with another Java framework, and it was so painful because I had to wait for everything. But with Quarkus, well, it's just a matter, you just keep it running and it will automatically restart for every time you save a file and you hit refresh in your browser. Okay, so here we have hola, but it's just a plain static string. What else can we do to improve it? For example, I could configure this as a property. So I could create like a new property called greeting, and I could say that, well, I can add a config property, and the name of the property could be greeting, for example. And instead of returning hola, I could give this and return the greeting property. So let me take some water. So now it's a dynamic property. I just saved the file. Always remember to save your files and hit refresh. And I have an error. And Quarkus always has very nice error messages. And Quarkus is complaining, well, you didn't provide the config value for greeting. So how do I fix this bug? The easiest way for me to fix this bug is to open my application properties file. and provide these properties. So let's do this. I say greetings, going to be, let's add some French, bonjour, and hit refresh. Yes, it's already there. Okay, so how long Quarkus did Quarkus take to refresh? It took like 178 milliseconds. So yes, we're pretty fast. It can be faster, but the more you use Quarkus, the faster it gets. I think it's amazing. So let's move back here. So what else can we do here? Since we're using Java 8 plus, doesn't need to be like just a string. Could be, for example, an optional. So if I provide, for example, an optional string, and I say, well, it's going to be greeting, but if I don't have it, it's going to be or else something else. Let's say instead of, let's try to add some Hawaiian, aloha. So if I save here, go back to my browser, hit refresh, it's still bonjour because I did provide the property. But if I go back here and change the property, if I make a typo, greeting to, yes, it's already complaining because it's a typo. Go back to my browser and refresh. You can see it's aloha because I didn't provide the property. Okay. And by the way, I just saw here, I have on a separate screen, I have the chat. So I'm not seeing because it's a very tiny font, but if you have anything, just open the mic and ask me. I'm available for you. Like this is an exclusive session just for you. So, and by the way, you don't have to wait for the entire session to ask questions. You can just open the mic and say something to me. I'm more than happy to to share some thoughts about Quarkus anytime, right? And what else can we do here? Example resource, we can always make it asynchronous. So this is just a plain old JAX-RS synchronous endpoint, but if I want to make it async, I can just change the return time for a completion stage, for example. So if I have a completion stage of string, and I say hello async endpoint, I just return a get. Let's try it, a path. And it's going to be slash hello, that's async, and return. Easiest way to create a completion stage, a completable future. Supply async, and let's hello, async, async. Okay. Create the file, go back here, refresh, and oops, I have an error. And the nice thing about Quarkus is usually when you have a stack trace, you have to scroll down until you find the most meaningful exception. But with Quarkus, we inverted the stack trace. And since we're running develop mode, whenever you have a compilation error, Quarkus provides you with a very nice error message. But for example, here on line 29, you forgot a semicolon. Actually, it's not a semicolon. I just made a mess here and I have an additional parenthesis, but as soon as I remove it, I just save the file, go back here, refresh, and yes, Quarkus is already there. And let's see if my async endpoint is working. Hello, it's slash async. Yes. Hello, I'm async. Everything is working smoothly. And by the way, this is an async endpoint, but if you want to create a reactive point, of course, we can do that. And to be honest, Quarkus, everything on Quarkus is running on top of Vertex, which is the most performant reactive web framework on the earth. So it's going to be super fast. It's going to have a very high throughput. You'll be able to handle like thousands, hundreds of thousands of requests per second because Quarkus with Vertex is super performant. Okay, and you might be telling me that, well, and let's see, check here the terminal. Quarkus this time took 133 milliseconds to be able to restart. You see, the more you use Quarkus, the faster it gets. But you might be arguing with me that Quarkus is only so fast because it's just an old static strings, JAX-RS REST endpoints. But no enterprise Java application is enterprise enough if you don't add a database. So let's do it and see. Let's see how fast Quarkus can be with a database. And how do I add a database support in Quarkus? You don't have to mess with your Pwn XML, even though you can if you want by hand, because with Quarkus you can add extensions on the fly through the IDE plugin. You can do that with Visual Studio Code. You can do that with IDEA, or you can use the Maven extension too, Maven plugin. What I'm going to use right now is the IDE plugin from Visual Studio Code. So if I add this extension, I can pick some things to works. For example, I need a JDBC driver, so let's add MariaDB. I also want to use Hibernate, and I want to show you a new API created by Quarkus called Panache. Let's try to add panache with hibernate. What else? I want to create some JSON REST endpoint. So let's try to add REST easy with JSON B support. I also want to test my REST endpoint. So I'm going to add some open API. And I also want to validate my endpoint. So let's try to add some hibernate validator. And I think it's good enough. But if it's not, well, we can always add more later, and it's always automatically on the fly. So I just hit enter, and you can see here in my terminal that the Visual Studio Code extension actually is calling the Maven plugin with some parameters. So it's just calling add extension and asking for the particular extensions. You don't have to type the whole name because, well, the Maven plugin is smart enough to figure out which extension do you want. And you can see with here, because of the emojis, that the extension has been installed. Super cool, right? And I think my project's ready. And because Quarkus in development mode is already running, we don't have to stop Quarkus for anything. So Quarkus detects any kind of changes in our projects for any resource files, any Java files, any pond.xml changes. Quarkus automatically detects that, so it's going to restart whenever you send a request to your browser. Okay, and if you want to know how it works, Quarkus is it wasn't a goal of the Quarkus project to have this amazing development mode, but after the engineers made like Quarkus work, they just realized, oh, Quarkus is so fast. Why don't we add a feature in the Maven plugin that, well, whenever we have a change, we just restart Quarkus and everything is automatically there, because Quarkus, as you see, restarts in a matter of 100 milliseconds. So they just added these very simple features. They just listen for changes, and every time you have a change, Quarkus just restarts because Quarkus is super fast. So you don't have any magic behind it. You don't have any complicated class loader things like class separation, proxy, no, nothing. It's just like a plain old Java restart. We just ask the Java process to restart, and it's already running. So Quarkus, yes, it's super fast. How do we test the database? So let's try to create our first JPA entity. So I'm going to create a developer. Because I'm a developer, you guys are developers, you guys and girls are developers, and we all love Java and Quarkus since today. So I'm going to create an entity at entity, and probably I would have to type very boring stuff like private long ID, at ID, at generated value. But this is the old boring way. With Quarkus, we can do much better than that. So I'm going to delete this stuff. And with Quarkus, if you want to be really productive, you can just do this extend panache entity. So Quarkus supports the traditional way that you've been doing Java development in the past like 25 years. But Quarkus also supports you with new APIs. And the new API that I want to show is panache. Panache, in this particular case, panache entity, provides you with the active record style persistent pattern. So people in the Java world are used to repositories. And like for complex domain model, maybe repositories are better. But if you have a simple domain model and you just want to expose your entity with a REST endpoint, well, maybe using active record style is better. And what is the active record style? If you ever used Ruby on Rails, or if you use like Play frameworks in the Java space, you know that active records is a persistent pattern where you blend your entity with your persistent methods. So you don't have to create a separate interface or class like a repository for doing that. You just mix everything together. And as I said before, it's very good for simple domain models. For complex domain models, maybe a repository is better, but Panache can help you with both. I'm just showing you the simplest approach, but we're going to create repositories later. Okay. So, and now we need a property. I don't need to type an ID because Panache entity already provides an ID for me. But if you want to provide your own IDs, we can do that too. And let's try to create a property. Private string, every developer has a name, private string name. And I would have to type boring getters and setters too, but not with Quarkus and Panache. Because think about that. If you're creating a private field and exposing everything as getters and setters, you don't have true encapsulation because you're exposing the internal state of your entity. So with Panache, we took a bold approach. So what if instead of creating private fields and generating getters and setters, what if we don't just code with a public field? And I know we have mixed reactions about that. It's very opinionated, but it just works like at or when coding, because at build time, Quarkus is going to convert this thing into a private field, and it's going to generate the getters and setters for you. So there's absolutely no difference at runtime. This just makes your life easier as you're coding. But remember, and also if you want to create your own getters and setters, Quarkus will use the getters and setters that you generated. So this thing is completely optional, and it's completed at build time, because at runtime is exactly the same thing, private field, public getters and setters. So there's no runtime penalty. But I'm going to do the novel way so you can see what's different. So I'm going to declare a public string name. And yes, I think we're good. How do we test this entity? Let's test this with a REST endpoint. So let's create another REST endpoint. I'm going to create another developer resource. Public class. I'm going to generate here an at path / developer. And I'm going to generate a get endpoint. I'm going to produce media type.json. So let's return a list of developers. List developers. Return, and let me import the right stuff. And I don't have a list. Yes, list. And I don't have to inject an entity manager. I don't need to inject a repository since I'm using Panache entity. I just need to type this developer dot list all, and I'm going to retrieve all of the developers in my database. Never do this in production, but since it's just a demo, we have a few entries. It should be enough to show. I save the file, and we're good to go. How do we test these endpoints? And remember, we didn't restart Quarkus yet, and everything is still working. So if I just go back here, localhost / developer. Right now, Quarkus is connecting to the database, and oops, I have an error. And why is that? No entity manager found. Do you have an API entities defined? Yes, I do. But the bug is that, well, I added extensions, but I didn't configure my database. So Quarkus doesn't know where is my database. How do we configure that? Go back here to my application properties, and let's type that. This is a way for you to configure database access through some properties. And if you're using the plugin, we even have a template here for you. So my database is MariaDB, username is SparkJoy, password SparkJoy, database SparkJoy2, SparkJoy. And I'm going to use one of my favorite Hibernate features, Hibernate database generation. It's going to be update. Because as I'm typing, Quarkus will automatically update the database schema for me, which is a very nice feature. Never do this in production. But since we're just hacking here a demo, this is a very nice feature. And I think it's enough now. I didn't miss anything this time. Let's hit refresh. I'm hitting refresh. And yes, it's returning an empty JSON array. And let's see here in my database. So if I open here my database, show tables. Yes, I have 2 tables right now. And if I describe developer, you can see that the developer already has an ID and has a name. But how do I make Quarkus show something on the web page? Well, maybe we need to add something here. So I could do just some boring insert statements here for the CLI. But I want to test this through a REST endpoint too. So let's try to do it. So I'm going to go back here to my code and developer resource. And let's try to create an insert post endpoint. So I'm going to create a post endpoint here, which is going to produce media type JSON. Is also going to consume media type.json. And yes, so public response new developer. I'm going to receive a developer. And here again, Panache entity makes everything easier. Let's import the right guy here. And if I want to persist a developer, all I need to do is to make sure that the ID is null. And no entity manager, no repository required. I just type developer.persist, and it's working. So if everything went well, I just type developer. I'll return response status. Status was created. I can return, let's do it, entity. It's a nice practice to return the entity that we just created, developer and .build. Okay, and that's all we need. And how do we test this post endpoint? You probably are thinking, well, maybe I need to create a very complicated curl CLI command. You don't need to do that. With Quarkus, we can test it in another way. Because since I added the OpenAI API extension, and since I'm running in development mode, Quarkus provides me automatically with the Swagger UI, which is an UI that allows me to test my REST endpoints. So you can see here that I have hello async. And what is happening here? Path developer. Yes, did I save the file? Save the file, save the files, save the files. Yes, let's hit refresh. Yes, it's already here. I forgot to save the files. Always remember to save the files, people. And here you can see I have get developer, post developer, and the interesting button in this one, try it out. So I'm going to click here, try it out. It even provides the schema for me. So let's try to persist the developer. So Yanaga, and if I try to execute that, you can see that, oops, I have an error. And what is this error? Quarkus always provides very nice error messages, as we've seen before. And you can see that the complaint is that, well, you're trying to persist something into the database, but you didn't provide a transaction. So how do we fix this? Since we're using Quarkus, it's very easy, very fast. I just need to go back here and add an annotation, transactional. I save the file. Always remember to save the files. Go back here to my UI, and I just hit the execute button again. Execute. And now I have the proper error response, return code. I have 201. It was created, and yes, I already have Yanaga here in the database. Let's try to add some more people here. I'm going to get some of you. So I'm going to get Ochieng, which is here. I'm going to execute. I'm going to get Dominic. And why I'm picking you guys? Well, I'm picking because you're the very first here on my Google Meet screen. So I'm going to get Hungai. And last one, I'm going to get, Hungai is twice. He's enjoying the session so much that he's twice here in the Google Meet. I'm getting my word too. Yes, I think it's enough. And let's see if it's working properly. Let's refresh the get developer endpoint. And yes, I already have 5 developers persisted here on my database. Let's see if everything is on the database truly. Select star from developer. And yes, everything is automatically there. Cool, isn't it? I think it is. What else we can do? Well, we can provide some validation here. So if I go back here to my developer, I could add a constraint and say, for example, well, the minimum size of the developer name should be 3. So if I just save the file and go back here to my Swagger UI and try to persist a developer with only 2 characters as a name, for example, me, if I try to do that and execute, then what happens? I have an error. I have an internal server error, but because Quarkus has very nice integration end-to-end, if I go back here to my developer resource, and I just add an annotation called valid, save the file, and I go back here and execute again. You see that Quarkus will provide me with the right return code, which is 400. Bad request. Well, you sent me a bad request. And the violation is that the name, developer.name, must be greater than or equals to 3. Okay? So Quarkus, yes, has very nice error messages too. What else can we do here? We can go back to developer. We can add another property, for example. Let's try to add another property. So I'm going to do public string favorite framework. And since it's just JPA, we can also use the JPA annotation. So let's try to do column. Column definition is going to be, well, let's make it a varchar 255. And the default is going to be Quarkus because everybody's favorite frameworks these days is Quarkus. So I just save here the file, go back here to my browser, and I send another request, refresh. And yes, everybody's favorite framework is already Quarkus. The property is already there. And if I go back here to my database, select again, you can see everybody's favorite framework is still Quarkus. Cool, isn't it? I think it is. So, and as I said before, if you go here to back to your IDE and you say Quarkus is generating the getters and setters for you automatically, because most Java frameworks, they require the getters and setters because of the Java Beans specification. But if you provide your own getters and setters, Quarkus will use them. Suppose you have a new requirement, for example, all the names should be uppercase. So I just save here, create new getter to with a name to uppercase, save the file, go back here, send refresh. You can see here that all the names already uppercase. And suppose that you have a new requirement saying that, well, maybe the favorite framework should be lowercase. Get favorite framework and add a to lowercase, save here, go back here, send a refresh, and all the favorite frameworks are already lowercase. Okay, that's how cool Quarkus can be, how iterative Quarkus can be when you're using the amazing development mode. What else can we do with Quarkus? Let's try to do something. Let's try to generate a build so we can see what's happening behind the scenes. So I'm going to stop development mode for now. Okay, so right now I'm going to execute an MVN clean package, and I'm going to skip tests. Never do this in production kits. I'm just doing this because it's a demo and because Quarkus automatically generates integration tests for you. We already integrated Quarkus with JUnit 5 and Rest Assured for integration testing. And we developed a new testing framework called Quarkus Testing Framework. Because if you use it in the Java to the Java EE landscape and you use Arquillian before, you know, Arquillian was like very heavy. But Quarkus is super fast, so we needed a super fast testing framework too. So that's why we're using Quarkus testing framework. And we have a build success here. Build success, and you can see that Quarkus generated two jars for us, the traditional jar, and we have a runner jar here, which is executable. And you can see that, let's try to do this. You can see that this running jar has only 400 kilobytes of size. So you have a whole Java application, a whole Java runner application packaging only 400 kilobytes of this size. Is that all? Well, no. First, let's see if it's really working. Java jar, Nairobi, runner. And yes, it's working. Let's go to localhost. Yes, it's still working. So is that all? Well, not all, because what Quarkus does, you can see here in the lib folder, what Quarkus did is that Quarkus generated a lib folder with all of your Quarkus dependencies and generated a runner jar. And why did we do that? Well, because these days, everybody's packaging applications in containers. And with containers, it's a very bad practice for you to be creating a fat jar because you're repackaging the same dependencies over and over again, even though you're only changing like your 400 kilobyte business logic on that. So with Quarkus, we did it differently. We added the things that don't change that often, your dependencies in the lib folder. So the lib folder is only 31 megabytes of this size, even with all of the dependencies packages. So yes, Quarkus is super small regarding the disk size too. So what you do that, you add the lib folder in a separate layer in your container. So that layer is cached. So whenever you're generating a new container image with your Quarkus application, you're only packaging the thing that is changing often, which is the business logic, and it only consumes like 400 kilobytes of this size. But if you want to generate a fat jar, for example, you have a legacy deployment, you want to copy just a single jar file to a remote destination, Quarkus can do that too. We have a feature called Uber jar. So if you do an Uber jar, Quarkus is going to generate what we call a fat jar with all of the dependencies packed in. Okay. And good. So what else can we do? Let's try to generate a native image. So Quarkus, well, everything that we did so far with Quarkus, we're just running on top of OpenJDK. By the way, I'm using Java 11. But if you want to generate a native image using GraalVM, you can. If you ever used GraalVM before, you know that with GraalVM can be super complicated because you have to configure a lot of things. It's a very slow process, very cumbersome. But with Quarkus, we integrated with GraalVM so nicely that all you have to do to generate a native image is to type these magic words, which is mvn package. I'm going to skip the test again, sorry, and enable the native profile. As soon as I enable the native profile, Quarkus is going to call GraalVM and generate a native image for me. So I'm just doing this. And why we're doing that? Because at my machine usually takes like 50 seconds to generate a native image. So, oh, By the way, I forgot. I want to create another microservice to make my life easier. So let's try to do this. The other way that we have to generate a Quarkus application is by using the Maven plugin. So I use a generator the first time. The second time right now, I'm going to use the generator. Quarkus Maven plugin. I'm going to use the latest version 161 final, and I'm going to create a pro group ID, Conrad Head Developers, Artifact Remote, project version, REST resource, yes, please. Oops, already exists. Let me remove it because it's from a previous demo. Let's run again. Red Hat developers. Yes. And that's all. Let's go here, remote, and again, package. At this time, I didn't need to skip the test because integration test will pass. And I just enabled the native profile, and we should be good to go. Now let me check the chat here. Oh Cheng is asking, does Panache have support for database initialization and mutation via versional migration DDL scripts? Yes. So we support a database migration tool called Flyway, which is my favorite, by the way. Yes, so you can plug the Flyway in the Quarkus initialization process. But in this modern DevOps world, even though we can use Flyway here, I don't recommend doing that. I always recommend that you run Flyway as a step on your deployment pipeline, but we support both ways. Okay, so it's a matter of choice because when you have multiple instances initializing at the same time, you don't want all of them checking the database version, even though you have like synchronized locks. You don't want to do that. You want that to be part of your deployment pipeline. But yes, we support this stuff through Flyway. And if you use that as part of your deployment pipeline, it will work with Liquibase too. Okay. Yes, and Dominic here is asking, does Quarkus integrate with both NoSQL and SQL databases? So that's a good question. And the answer is, if you're running on top of OpenJDK, which is what I'm running right now, yes, we support everything in the Java ecosystem. If you want to create a native image using GraalVM, the answer is it depends. Because with GraalVM is super complicated. If you want to make sure that it works with native mode in GraalVM, then you need to use a Quarkus extension. So if you have a Quarkus extension for that particular database, then yes, it will work with GraalVM with native image. If it doesn't, it might or it might not work. So the answer, if you want a native image, is it depends. And another question here, Ocheng is asking, apart from Java, can a developer use any other JVM language that sparks joy to rock Quarkus app? Oh, I see you got the sparks joy already. So what we do support right now, we do support Kotlin, and technically we could be supporting any other language in the JVM, but it's what is happening right now. It's Quarkus is evolving so fast. We don't have enough engineers to be providing the support for all of the JVM languages. So we have support for Java. It's a first-class citizen. We also have support for Kotlin. And technically, people asking me about Scala or other languages. Yes, it's possible. We just need somebody to write the proper extension for that. So if you have the time, if you're willing to do that, if you write, for example, the Scala extension or any other language for Quarkus, yes, Quarkus will be super fast and super small for that particular language too. Okay. And just regarding the database, if you go to the Quarkus.io website, you can see which databases we do support. So we support InfiniSpan for key value store, MongoDB, and most SQL databases. And yes, that's it. You just have to go to the Quarkus website. But if you want to run on top of OpenJDK, we support everything that is running on the Java ecosystem. Right? So let me just go back here to the slides a bit. Because I said it sparks joy, but let's see then some numbers too. So while we were was asking some questions and creating the native image, which by the way already finished, you can see here that some slides how fast and how small Quarkus is. So Quarkus was created with this container first, Kubernetes first word in mind. So container support wasn't an afterthought. So, and Quarkus was designed since the principle to be super fast to boot up and reply to the first request, and to consume very tiny amount of memory, which was the weakness of Java applications so far. Because when Java was created, it was okay when Java was created 25 years ago. Java would run in a single server. We would be able to consume the entire memory, entire CPU of that particular server. But the world has changed. Now we have cloud computing. Now we don't want big servers anymore. We want to be able to scale up and scale down by using horizontal scaling instead of vertical scaling. So you want your applications to start up very fast when you have like a lot of requests, and you want to scale down when you don't have requests because you want to save money. And Java wasn't a good fit. And to be very honest with you, that's why in the past 5 years, a lot of Java developers, they switched to another languages and platforms, for example, to Node.js, JavaScript, Node.js, and to Go, because Java wasn't a first-class citizen for the cloud. But with Quarkus, everything changed. And this is my personal opinion. And it's not because I work for Red Hat. I think Quarkus changed the Java landscape. I think in some years from now, we'll be able to say that, well, Java development was one thing. We'll be able to divide in two different areas. We'll have like before Quarkus and after Quarkus, because you had the fat and slow Java before Quarkus, and after Quarkus, Java is super small and super fast. Okay, so that's the mindset that we had in mind. So Quarkus does the Java applications don't have to eat the entire memory of your server, don't have to wait to take forever to boot up and reply to the first request. Your Java applications can be super fast and super small thanks to Quarkus. So, but let me show you some numbers. So first number here is regarding memory consumption. And we're not measuring heap size, we're measuring resident set size, because you have to measure the stacks, the threads, the heap memory, non-heap memory. So we're computing all of that. So if you're running Quarkus with GraalVM for just a simple REST endpoint application, Quarkus is going to consume in production approximately 13 megabytes of total RAM size. Quarkus running on top of OpenJDK is going to consume only 74 megabytes of RAM. And your traditional cloud native stack is going to take at least 140 megabytes of RAM. So that's how small Quarkus can be when running in production. So depending on your use case, Quarkus can be 10 times smaller, or Quarkus can be 2 times smaller. So, but Quarkus is always much smaller than anything else that you've ever seen in the Java space. And if you want to see some production numbers from real customers, well, Vodafone in Europe, they're not using GraalVM, they're using just OpenJDK, but they switched their Spring Boot applications to Quarkus, and they were able to save like they reduce it to half their bill size from their Amazon cloud computing costs. So they just switched to Quarkus. Quarkus is consuming the half amount of the memory, and they're paying the half amount of the bill too. So I think it's a very nice saving for anybody. So let's try to add other numbers. If you add JPA and database to your equation, so if you're running Quarkus with GraalVM, Quarkus is going to consume 35 megabytes of RAM. If you're running with OpenJDK, it's going to consume 130 megabytes of RAM. And your traditional cloud native stack is going to consume 218 megabytes of RAM. That's how small Quarkus can be when you're running a database too. Cool, isn't it? I think it is. So, and how about how fast Quarkus is? Well, and what we're measuring here is time to reply to the first request. Okay, so we're not measuring startup times, because other frameworks, for example, they cheat. They say they declare everything as lazy, and they show you a very small startup time. But when you send the first request, it takes another 20 seconds or 1 minute to be able to handle the first request. With Quarkus, we're measuring how much does it take to boot and reply successfully to the first request. So because that's what really matters in the cloud native world. And it's even more important if you want to run, for example, a serverless workload where you don't have anything running and you want to send a request and you want to reply super fast. So that's how Quarkus is optimized for. So we're optimizing for cloud native and serverless workloads. So to give you some numbers, if you're using REST and GraalVM, Quarkus will take approximately 14 milliseconds to reply to the first request. If you're running on top of OpenJDK, Quarkus is going to take 750 milliseconds. And Your traditional cloud native stack is going to take at least 4.3 seconds. Okay, oops, 4.3 seconds. Add JPA to the equation. So Quarkus with JPA is going to take 55 milliseconds to boot and reply to the request. Quarkus with OpenJDK is going to take 2.5 seconds. And your traditional cloud native stack is going to take so long that I had to scroll here the picture because it's going to take at least 9.5 seconds. That's how fast Quarkus can be when running your workloads. And some people mistake with Quarkus. Oh, Quarkus only works with GraalVM. No, that's not true. Quarkus works with everything. Quarkus works with any JVM, works with like OpenJDK, works with GraalVM. And with Quarkus, you only have two options. Quarkus can be super fast and super small when running on OpenJDK, or it can be even faster and smaller when running on top of GraalVM. So you make your choice, but you're always going to be super fast and super small. And oh, I see a question here. Dominic is asking, apart from REST, does it support GraphQL? Some weeks ago, the answer was no, but we should check here. Let's see here. Browser. Quarkus IO. If you go here, if you want to see what is supported, you can always go here and you can see that, yes, we have GraphQL support. So you just have to go to the Quarkus website and check which extensions are supported, because every single week people are contributing new extensions. So yes, GraphQL is supported, and we, for example, gRPC also recently was added to the extension list. So every week people are adding and contributing new extensions. So by the way, if you want to contribute, you just have to go to the Quarkus IO website. The engineers are very supportive. You just submit a PR, you just chat with the guys and girls there, and you should be good. Okay. And what else? I think, well, we're ready. And let's get back to the demo. So yes, my native image is already built. And since we're streaming, this time it took like 2 minutes to be able to generate my native image. So I go back here to my target folder. You can see that now I have this native image runner, and it's taking 26 megabytes of disk size, and it's all that I need because it's self-contained. Let's try to run this application. Runner. And yes, file allow, and it's already running. Let's move here to my browser, localhost 8080. Yes, it's running. And let's do a /hello. Yes, it's running, turning hello. And how much memory is this process taking? Let's try to open another tab here. And I have an alias already that's measuring how much memory this process is consuming. So let's grab runner. And yes, this particular process in my machine is consuming 25 megabytes of disk size. And sorry, I forgot to tweak the Java memory, but I made some tests. This Hello World Java application, if I can tune the heap size to be only 6 megabytes of heap size, and it runs. I tried with 4 megabytes, but it doesn't run. Did you ever wonder the day when a Java application would be able to run with a 6 megabyte heap size? Me neither, but thanks to Quarkus, this day has arrived. That's why how small Quarkus can be when running your things. Okay. So, oh, and I forgot to show you how long did it take. Well, today we're in a bad day because, as I said before, we're running this thing on Google Meet, and I'm also running OBS because of my camera. This time, Quarkus took 25 milliseconds to boot. But when I'm not using this streaming thing, in my machine, usually takes 9 milliseconds, 10 milliseconds to be able to start my application. So Quarkus can be even faster if you don't have an overload on machine like what I have right now. Okay, let's stop this, and I want to go to my other project, my Nairobi JVM project. Let's start the development mode again because I have more features to show to you. And it's working. So let's go back here to my ID. And I'm pretty sure that if I were with you right now in the room, if I asked how many of you are Spring developers or Spring Boot developers, I'm almost sure that like 70% or almost up to 100% of you would raise your hands, because Spring Boots these days are very popular. Actually, I'm a Spring Boot fan. I've been a Spring developer since Spring 1.0 Beta 2. So it has been quite some years, yeah, almost 20 years since I'm a Spring developer. and I dedicated my entire career to Spring. So that's some of the things that you might be wondering. Well, Quarkus is so amazing. It's so fast and so small, but I know I've been doing Spring for quite a long time. And is there a way that I can like reuse my Spring skills, but still yet be super fast and super small? Okay, CEO Cheng is a Spring developer. Yes, I am a Spring developer too, but I want to be super fast and super small, and yet I want to reuse my Spring skills. Is there a way for me to do that? Yes, you can. And all you have to do is to go back here and add the Spring, another extension to your Quarkus project. Just add the Spring extensions. So what we're going to do right now is I'm going to add the Spring Web extension. I'm also going to add the Spring Data extension, and we should be good. I'm doing this. I'm adding these extensions. And remember, these extensions are just like dependencies, Java dependencies. If I open a pwn.xml file, you'll be able to see that I have here. I just added right now the Spring Web and Spring Data. And that's all that I need. OK? So what we're going to do, I forgot to show you how to create a repository with Panache. Let's do that because I want to compare with Spring. So let's create a developer repository. Java with Panache. So I said Panache support Active Record. Does support with repositories too? Yes. I just create a class with application scoped, and I implement Panache repository. And this case is going to be a developer. And I can create like custom queries, like this public list, developer, and find Brazilian. Okay, and how the find Brazilian works? Well, return, find, and I have here a kept query. If you ever created JPQL queries, no, it's super boring. Select something from developer D, where D dot something. But with Panache, since we know it's a Panache repository of developer, and since we're retrieving and queuing developer entities, all I have to do is like name, or name equals to this. And I can say, well, name equals to Yanaga. And dot list. And that's all that I need for a custom one. So I'm just going to tweak the developer resource. So let's try to add here a query parameter. Query parameter is going to be Brazilian. It's going to be a Boolean Brazilian. And I say, well, if Brazilian, we're going to use the repository. So now I just need to inject here. I can ask developer repository. And I can use inject, and it's good. I just say return developer repository dot find Brazilian. Okay, save the file. Let's test if it works. So I go back here to localhost developer, refresh. Yes, everybody's still there, but if I type Brazilian equals to true, yes, it only finds a Brazilian. I suppose none of you are Brazilian, just as me. So, and yes, it's working. So let's do the same with Spring right now. So you can see we can use repositories or we can use active records. And we're going to switch right now. And so what can we do here? First, let's try to create a Spring Data repository. So I'm going to Spring developer repository dot Java. So this is going to be an interface. And if you ever used the Spring Data before, you know that I just have to extend JPA repository, or in case it's a developer and the ID type is long. Okay, and let's create a custom finder here, public list developer find by name and provide the string name. Okay, and I have a custom finder here. And let's create a new file. Let's create a Spring controller. I'm going to call it the developer controller. Java. Oops. In this case, it's a class. I'm going to use, it's going to be a REST controller. going to request mapping is going to be /spring-developer. And let's create a get mapping. Public list, developers. And since I'm using Spring, I need to use the repository. I'm going to use an @autowired. Oh yes, we support construction injection, but I'm just lazy. That's why I'm using field injection for this demo. And I can say, well, developer, Spring developer. Repository. And that's all. I can return. Oh, let's do the same. I'm going to add a request parameter to be Brazilian. Brazilian. If Brazilian, return developer repository, find by name. It's going to find Yanaga. Or else return developer find all. I guess it's exactly the same thing. So I'm using the Spring APIs, and let's test it. So yes, my Jackson endpoint is still working, but if I just go here and localhost 8080 Spring-developer, yes, it's working. And if I add the Brazilian parameter, Brazilian equals to true, yes, it's still working. So yes, you can reuse your existing Spring skills on top of Quarkus too. But please have in mind that when you're running Spring on top of Quarkus, we're not really running Spring. What we're using, well, think about the Spring interfaces, the Spring API, and the Spring annotations as a way for you to provide metadata to your application. So when we're running the Spring extension on top of Quarkus, we're just getting the information from the Spring APIs, we're fetching that, and we're running with Quarkus. So we just re-implemented the Spring APIs on top of Quarkus, so you can still be super fast and super small. We wouldn't benefit anything from running Spring on top of Quarkus, because for your application to be super fast and super small, it needs to be optimized for Quarkus. Okay, so if you run Spring on top of Quarkus, your Spring part is going to be as fast and as slow as Spring, but the Quarkus part will be super fast and super small. So to be super fast and super small, we re-implemented some of the Spring APIs on top of Quarkus, so you can benefit from your favorite Spring APIs. So we support Spring Data, we support Spring Web, we support Spring Security, and if you want other APIs too. And if your favorite Spring API is not there yet, well, just ask. Go to the mailing list, go open an issue. Oh, I love this in my project. I love, for example, Spring something, Spring Webflow, which I used it a lot in the past. I want that. Can you implement that? If enough people ask for that, maybe they'll think, the Quarkus engineers will think and implement. And if you're really willing to, you can always implement by yourself. Okay. So and what else Quarkus supports? Let me play here. And now wait, okay. So let's move here with my slides. And why is Quarkus so fast and so small? What is the magic behind Quarkus? Well, Quarkus is super fast and super small because Quarkus does everything ahead of time. And Quarkus is ahead of time because your traditional Java application, the way the things has been done in the past 25 years, is that your traditional cloud Java application in the past 25 years, when you're starting up your application needs to scan for annotations, scan for XML files, property files, YAML files, JSON files. It needs to find all of these resources. Then it needs to parse the descriptors. It needs to fetch all the metadata in those files, the metadata in the annotation, XML files, property files. Then it needs to generate the meta model, which means that, oh, I have a bean. I have another bean. This other bean needs to be injected into this bean. But this bean has a transactional proxy. So I have to create a proxy this bean, and inject the proxy instead of the bean. So all of these things are performed at boot time. And that's why it takes forever. But think about that. It made sense when you would start your application server and run your Java application for months before restarting that, because you would only run these things once. But in this new cloud native world, you're killing instances and spinning up instances all the time. So it doesn't make sense for you to be paying this price every single time because you're doing this multiple times per day. And after you did all of this, you start the services. Okay, this is any traditional Java application that past 25 years. With Quarkus, we're doing a different approach. So the magic behind Quarkus is that we do all of these things at build time. So the magic behind Quarkus is the Quarkus plugin. So Quarkus does all of these steps at build time, and we generate a very optimized bytecode using an extension called Gizmo. So whenever Quarkus starts, Quarkus only needs to read this bytecode and start the services. That's why Quarkus is so fast and so small. Well, it explains why Quarkus is so fast. And why is Quarkus so small? Well, if you have to scan for annotation, you have to load the class for annotation scanning. You have to look for XML files. You have to load the classes for XML files, and so on. And you see in these three traditional steps, you have to load a lot of classes, even though you're never using these classes in production. They're only required to bootstrap your application. Well, Quarkus is super small because Quarkus only load the classes that are required for your application at runtime. We don't load anything that is only required at build time. So that's why Quarkus is so fast and why it's so small. And what does Quarkus support? Well, Quarkus supports a lot of different extensions. So since the very first release, we supported Reactive Vertex, Hibernate, REST-Easy, Camel, Macroprofile, Netty, Kubernetes, OpenShift, Jaeger, Prometheus, Kafka, and Finispan, and uh, GraphQL, MongoDB, lots of different database, and name your extension. It's very likely that your extension is already there. So, and the Quarkus community is growing a lot. We have seen a lot of people using Quarkus. People are contributing a lot to Quarkus, and Quarkus is evolving so fast. We have a new version of Quarkus every 2 weeks. So if you want a feature, just ask. Maybe like 2 weeks later, the feature is already there. So yes, we have a lot of people that are involved in the Quarkus project. People from Red Hat, people from outside of Red Hat. Yes, a lot of people are enjoying Quarkus, and they are sparking joy every day in their lives. So, and I have a question here from Ochieng. Can one compile and build a native Quarkus app with Spring Boot dependencies using GraalVM? Well, it depends on what you call a Spring Boot dependency. If you ever try to run GraalVM with Spring Boot, you know that it's a very painful process. It takes a lot of steps, super complicated, and super slow. You're going to take like half an hour to build your application, if not even more. With Quarkus, you see, it's super fast to build a native image too. If you use the Quarkus extension for that Spring API, yes, you can build a native image and you don't have to do anything. You just enable the native profile and it will just work. If you want to use a Spring API that doesn't have a Quarkus extension, the answer is it depends, but like most of the things in the Spring ecosystem, it doesn't work well with GraalVM. Okay, so that's the current experience of using Spring. I know that the Spring team is working with GraalVM, but if you ever try that, it takes a lot of time. Usually it fails, and they're only starting the process, so it's going to take like a year or two, maybe, for they able to compile that. And I hope they optimize the process, but I expect it to still be painful and take a lot of time. And with Quarkus, you see, it's a breeze. You don't have to do anything. You just have to enable the native profile. Okay. Oh, great. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. So that is what I had to share with you to Quarkus today. We're already on top of the hour. I even have more features of Quarkus that I could show to you, but I think it was enough. And I know that we're online. I know it's like 6 p.m. for you, I guess, and people get tired. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And again, just be sure to follow me on Twitter. I'm always available to ask questions. You can send me a DM on Twitter at Yanaga, or if you want to email me, my email is yanaga@redhat.com. And again, thank you very much for staying with me on a Saturday afternoon. I know it's super hot, but I really appreciate that you're here.
Thank you, Edson. I don't think we have any more questions in the chat, but I'll just like to ask one last one around enterprise support. So Quarkus is pretty much being driven by the community and also being contributed to by Red Hat and other companies. But how does a company that's interested in building around Quarkus, how do they approach Red Hat or any other company for enterprise support?
All right. Yes, Quarkus now is supported by Red Hat, and when we say is supported, you're going to have like if you have like security vulnerabilities, it's going to be fixed in 24 hours. Data corruption issues, all of this. Your traditional Red Hat support. And the answer is that yes, you can. If you need support, uh, you can contact any person from Red Hat. They'll be able to guide you for that. And actually, if you're running, for example, JBoss, or if you're running OpenShift, or if you're running any other Java middleware from Red Hat, and if you have support, it's very likely that you already have Quarkus support too. Okay, so the Red Hat subscription, for example, you have OpenShift and you're running JBoss on top of that. You can run, for example, Quarkus and Spring Boot on top of OpenShift, and Red Hat will provide support for all of them. So you don't have to do anything. And yeah, and you always have, of course, the community support too, which is amazing. So you can choose. You can use the community support, or if you want to pay, like you have, like you work for a bank, you need support for security vulnerabilities. Yes, you can call Red Hat, and yes, we will support that. And remember, the Red Hat SLA is whenever we say something is supported by Red Hat, you can be sure that for the next 10 years, you have the security data fix vulnerabilities guaranteed in the next 24 hours for you.
Great. Um, no new questions, just appreciation from the chat, from Agwings, conveying thanks. Same to Samuel. Looks like we have a lot of Spring developers here, and I think we can all appreciate um, what Quarkus is bringing on the table, the different conversation and the joy that's derived from now developing applications using Quarkus. Uh, I have nothing else to say. I think we are good on time, and I'd like to thank everybody for joining in the meetup on a Saturday in the evening. And also, much thanks to you, Edson, for taking us through that wonderful session on Quarkus and also conveying joy to the attendees. Um, Hongai, would you like to say anything before we end this meetup? Hongai?
Nope, I have nothing to say. Thank you so much, Edson. Please pass my regards to my former colleague, Marcus, who uh, is the reason why we are having this meetup. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's pretty early in the US right now, but yeah, we appreciate everything and the time you've been able uh, to present or at least to offer us. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome, and my pleasure. You can always count on me. You can always ping me. I'm always willing to share some love with my friends, and now I have friends in Kenya too. So yes, it's a plus for me. So thank you all for attending this presentation, and I hope to meet you physically very soon after all of these crazy things like go away.
Likewise, we'll share the link to the recording and also various links pointing to Quarkus, the Quarkus site, and documentation and how to contribute. There being nothing else to say, thank you guys and have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Good weekend. Enjoy your weekend.
Nice weekend.